Today we're in beautiful Lovell Canyon, just outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. Let's take a 360-degree look where we are. This is looking over toward Death Valley, Nopa Range, down Lovell Canyon, Landmark Bluff, Potosi Mountain, across the east side of Lovell Canyon, Rainbow Mountain's Upper Crest Ridgeline, Wilson Ridgeline, back to the upper end of Lovell Canyon. And today we're going to do a grand review of Lovell Canyon from its upper ridge lines. We're going to start on the Wilson Ridgeline on the east side. We'll head up the Wilson Ridgeline to the summit of Harris Mountain and then cross the upper end of Lovell Canyon between Harris Mountain and Griffith Peak, the Harris-Griffith Saddle, and then head down from Griffith Peak on the Sexton Ridge line back to the Lovell Canyon Trailhead, where we're going to start. It's an elephant of a trip, and it's been said you can eat an elephant but take it one bite at a time. So the first bite is going to be from the Lovell Canyon Trailhead to the Lovell Canyon Crossing. Second bite will be from the opposite side of east side of Lovell Canyon up to the Wilson Ridgeline. Third bite, Wilson Ridgeline to the intersection with Harris Mountain Road. Fourth bite, intersection of Harris Mountain Road to Harris Mountain Summit. Fifth bite, Harris Mountain Summit across the Harris-Griffith Saddle to Griffith Peak Summit. Sixth bite, Griffith Peak Summit down Sexton Ridge to the Griffith Shadow Loop Trail. And the seventh and final bite is going to be from the Griffith Shadow Loop Trail back to the Lovell Canyon Trailhead, where we start. So let's get going. Here we are at the parking area just about a quarter mile below the Lovell Canyon Trailhead, and let the first bite begin. Lovell Canyon has some pretty awesome camping areas. Here's an upper camping area at the Lovell Canyon Trailhead. First come, first served, no reservations required. You can camp here up to 2 weeks. Beautiful views, access to awesome trails, and we are actually at the Lovell Canyon Trailhead now. It's right here at the camping area. And here it is. We're going to ascend this trailhead on the west side of the canyon to some awesome views, get a good preview of our route ahead. Now, as we progress on this adventure, I'm going to point out some of the plants. I'm not a botanist, so it's not going to be very exhaustive, but just some of the main plants. When we're ascending the Wilson Ridge, ashy silk tassel creates a barrier wall along with pointed leaf manzanita. But One thing about ashy silk tassel is it has some medicinal properties where it acts kind of like ibuprofen as a painkiller. You chew on the leaves. And then here is another edible plant. You see a lot of these. This is Mormon tea. And then over in this direction, juniper. You can see some berries. Some of the berries on some varieties of juniper are edible. They're pretty bitter, but I guess you can grind them up and make them into a kind of a flour. And then here we have pinyon pine. You see a lot of varieties of pine as we progress. So, and then of course, yucca. So there's a lot in this beautiful forest if you take time to stop and look. We're on the Lovell Canyon Trail, not far from the trailhead, about a half mile at the most. And this is one of my favorite views of Lovell Canyon. And you can see the beautiful canyon stretching out before us. Here's the Wilson Ridgeline leading up to Harris Mountain, the Harris Griffith Saddle leading to Griffith Peak, and the Sexton Ridge leading downward back to where we are right now. So, as I mentioned, the first bite of this elephant adventure is to continue on the Lovell Canyon Trail and loop down to the base of the canyon, and then we'll ascend the Wilson Ridge, probably end up either at that height or this height, depends on what presents itself as the best possibility, and then reach Harris Mountain Road right about this area, ascend to Harris Mountain Summit, and then over to Griffith Peak and back. But yeah, this is just beautiful all the way. And by the way, here's another plant, Gamble's Oak. Gamble's Oak is a plant that has roots extending 300 feet below the surface to find water. So there you have it, Gamble's Oak. Okay, let's continue. We got a lot of ground to cover. And the reason my voice may be a little bit shaky during this adventure, especially during the beginning, is that I'm carrying enough water for a couple days now. I may have overdone it. I'm carrying around 8 to 9 liters of water. This pack is heavy, and my body is saying, "You did what?" So, yeah, it's it's a new experience for me. I don't usually spend the night, but you know, in order to make this entire loop, it's really a 2-day loop, for me at least. Now, if you're a runner and you're in much better shape than me, you could probably do this loop in 1 day. There's about 75% is in the wilderness with no trails, and 25% has trails. So even if you're a runner, you're going to do a lot of walking. I picked one of the longest days of the year. As I mentioned, it's the beginning of August, and here's the challenge, is that you want a lot of sunlight. You want maximum sunlight, but you don't want to be roasting in the summer heat. So this is about the best compromise I can come up with for this adventure. Another thing I'd mention as far as my preparation is that I have actually covered just about every inch of this circuit in separate adventures. So I'm familiar with the area. There's probably going to be about 1 mile that is new ground to me. But the rest of the adventure, and I'm imagining we're looking at close to 30 miles before we're done. 29 miles are ground that I've covered previously. And I would recommend trying this adventure in pieces before you take the whole adventure, because the last thing you want to do is commit yourself to the entire loop and then get bogged down because you're lost or you took a wrong ridge that became very difficult due to the some 6,000 feet elevation gain by the time we get up to Griffith Peak. There's going to be some temperature extremes here. A home run on today's leg of the journey would be to make Griffith Peak and sleep on Griffith Peak. But the temperature up there is going to be in the area of 40 degrees, maybe in the 30s. On the other hand, down in Las Vegas, it's 102 degrees today. And in this area, it's probably about a high of mid 70s, 80 degrees. Up on the Wilson Ridge, once we make the Wilson Ridge and we're heading toward Harris Mountain and the Harris Griffith Saddle, should be comfortable 70 degrees during the day and all the way up between Harris Mountain and Griffith Peak. So a lot of temperature extremes that we're going to be dealing with. So that's part of the weight that I'm carrying, is enough clothing and a sleeping bag to manage the lowest temperatures. But most of the weight is water. And I'm predicting that for each bite of the 7 bites of this adventure, I'm probably going to end up 5 pounds lighter, which is good news. But we're on the first bite, full weight. Okay, here's a good example of pointed leaf manzanita. Now, I'm not going to point out a whole lot of plants today because I don't know many plants, but these are the main ones. You're bound to see a whole lot a pointed leaf manzanita, and ashy silk tassel. We're approaching the first intersection. We have been on the Lovell Canyon Trail. This is where the Lovell Canyon Loop begins. And heading down to the right loops you down into the base of Lovell Canyon. That's the way we're going to go. When we emerge tomorrow, hopefully, it's going to be on this side of the loop, which comes down from the Griffith Shadow Loop Trail. So here we go. I like to name things. If I don't know a ridge name or a peak name, I just give it a name. And so I think it's only appropriate to name my backpack. I'm going to call my backpack Godzilla. And here we are, continuing on the Lovell Canyon Loop, descending to Lovell Canyon and looking in the distance at the Wilson Ridge, which is probably going to be the most difficult part of this adventure, ascending to the summit of the Wilson Ridge. Here's another plant. It's mountain mahogany. The curved leaves help reduce exposure to sunlight and moisture loss. So be seeing a lot of these along the way. I'm not going to identify them each time, but see if you can identify what you're looking at. Now, I'm looking at ascent ridge possibilities here. And you see across the canyon that rocky outcrop there at the base of a ridge that continues on up to the Wilson Ridge, up in the upper Wilson Ridgeline. That may be our ascent. It depends on what things look like when I get there. Here's a beautiful view of Lovell Canyon as we're descending the Lovell Canyon loop to the base of Lovell Canyon where we're going to cross. And there is the base. That's approximately where the crossing is. You can't see it too well because there's such thick brush down there. But the ridge we will ascend is this approach ridge to the Wilson Ridgeline above, and perhaps reaching the Wilson Ridgeline up at this high point. There's the Wilson Ridge on the east side of Lovell Canyon, where the sun is rising, or has risen, I guess. And there's Harris Mountain. That would be second base today to achieve the summit of Harris Mountain. A home run would be to achieve the summit of Griffith Peak. No promises on that one. And I'll point a few sites out along the way. If you're heading up the center of Lovell Canyon and you want to find the trail, this rocky outcrop, well, let's say you're heading back down and you want to find where to connect with the Lovell Canyon Loop, this rocky outcrop is a good marker. At the base on the other side is where you can connect with the Lovell Canyon Loop. And what else? This trail system is really the best and perhaps the only way to get into upper Lovell Canyon. And the reason is that if you were to try the gully, it seems like that's a more direct route from the parking area. There are no trails down there. And believe me, the brush is very thick. You got to pass through some private property in order to get down there from the parking area. So the best bet is take the trails to upper Lovell Canyon. And yeah, look how beautiful this canyon is. And here we are now, having reached the base of Lovell Canyon, or at least the baseline wash. Now watching for that crossing point. We got to cross over to the other side and then ascend the hill to the rocky outcrops. And yes, here is the crossing. This used to be a sign that pointed to where you cross the canyon. Looks like we might have sort of a trail there. In fact, there's a little sign halfway across that simply says trail. And that's actually the counterclockwise direction of the Griffith Shadow Loop that then circles the canyon at about a mid-level of height. This direction would be the clockwise direction of the Griffith Shadow Loop if you start from down here. On the other hand, you might want to start where we mentioned above, where we first came across the Lovell Canyon Loop intersection. So yeah, and that looks like it might be our ascent ridge, but not sure. Okay, let's take a look at this crossing. I remember last time I made this crossing, there was so much brush, it was impossible to see the trail. Much more open this time. Yeah, this is nice. And we're heading straight toward the ridge. We're going to ascend. Here's a look at the canyon from mid-canyon. Wow, how beautiful. And as I mentioned, if you're coming down the canyon, looking to where to connect with the trail, there, that rocky outcrop is your indicator. Especially if everything's so brushy that you can't see the canyon at all. At least you can't see where you're walking. Okay, we've crossed the canyon and the trail resumes on this side. I'm gonna pass the base of this rocky area and see if there's a slope on the other side that looks like a better ascent slope. You can see the brush is just way thick on the other side, but I think we're gonna be moving through some brush in order to get to the summit of the Wilson Ridge, no matter which way we take. So let's just see how things work out this way. Now at this U-turn in the trail, we're going to leave the trail, and this is our ascent point to the Wilson Ridgeline, which is bite number 2 of this elephant adventure. And we're going to head up this ridge. We're leaving trails at this point and just weaving around through the wall of pointed leaf manzanita and ashy silk tassel. So here we go, and our goal up the top of the Wilson Ridgeline. Continuing up the ascent ridge to the Wilson Ridgeline, which is on the horizon above. A lot of brush, but actually there are pathways through the brush without knocking them down or disturbing them. And there's looking at upper Lovell Canyon, Harris Mountain on the right, above Griffith Peak on the left, and then looking down Sexton Ridge, you can see that line of trail on the other side, which is part of the Schaefer Springs Loop. Handy Peak. Yeah, I want to really give you a good idea of Lovell Canyon during this adventure. This is a big review of the canyon. Right there is that rocky outcrop that marks the resumption of the Lovell Canyon Loop if you were heading down this pathless canyon, which I've done. It can work out well. It can also really bog you down. So yeah, ascending up to the Wilson Ridge above, and then taking the Wilson Ridge over to Harris Mountain. Like I said, achieving that today would be second base. Griffith Peak would be a home run. We'll see. Okay, let's continue lugging Godzilla up to the ridge line. A little further up here, with emphasis on the word little. A lot of brush. There we're looking across Lovell Canyon to the Sexton Ridge. And then up toward the Wilson Ridge. Can't see it right now. It's a little further beyond these hills. Give you an idea of what we're doing here. I don't like the term bushwhacking. I use the term bush weaving, try to disturb as little as possible. But as you can see, it's pretty thick here. And there aren't a whole lot of choices where to go. But if you look carefully, take your time, there is a path of least resistance. And that's how we manage the wall of manzanita and ashy silk tassel, which you'll encounter up here. Wow, between the steepness and the brush and Godzilla, this last stretch was a real monster. But we're closing in on the Wilson Ridge, as you can see, directly ahead. So we should be there soon. Okay, now it's just a matter of circling around to the left at that, where the forest begins over there. And then on to the Wilson Ridgeline and on up to Harris Mountain. So the terrain's much more wide open here, a lot easier to navigate. Yeah, look at this. There's Lovell Canyon below, Griffith Peak across, Curious Cave just below Griffith Peak, a little to the right. Pretty awesome up here, but wow, that really drained me. Okay, we can say, well, at least once I get, oh, by the way, yeah, there is the Wilson Ridge Southern High Point. I've got a Las Vegas Area Trails Adventures up there. Just a beautiful place. Okay, now the thing is to head over to that ridge horizon. I guess I can't say we're entirely on the Wilson Ridgeline until we can look over the edge and see Kyle Canyon on the other side. So we got a little ways more to go, but the thing is to get over to that high point or horizon ridge and then work our way over toward Harris Mountain. So all is well. I think I probably lost about 5 pounds on that ascent to the Wilson Ridgeline. Wow. Anyway, yeah, the less the better. Always looking for objects that don't belong. I have no idea what this is. In the middle of nowhere. Probably have to wait till I see the video. And now as we look ahead on the Wilson Ridge, we're heading for this rise up to the top and then over this cone-shaped high point is on the other side of Harris Mountain Road. So the next stretch here, or the next bite, the third bite, is up to Harris Mountain Road. So let's see how all that plays out. Sorry for all the moving around on the video, but it's very windy here. Bright sun, can hardly see the phone screen. But here you're looking at where we are. And then down in this area, you see part of the Las Vegas Valley. So let's continue forward. Navigating through a forested area now. This area escaped a huge burn around the Griffith Peak area, upper Wilson Ridge. You can see some charred trees here. This is probably where the firefighters drew a line at some point. But we're going to continue weaving around through here, and eventually we'll see the open ridge line ahead. And then, just as a note, looks like that's the sheep range over there. The far side of Highway 95. And then over in this direction, La Madre Mountain, Burnt Peak, El Padre Mountain, over in this area. So we're right in the middle of some really cool wilderness areas here. We'll see a lot more once we get out of the forest. And also from this perspective, there is Angel Peak. So it's always good to recognize landmarks surrounding where you are in the wilderness. Okay, let's get through this forest and see what else we can see. Okay, this is our next high point. And we should be looking down on Harris Mountain Road when we reach that point. Very windy. Hard to hold the phone in my hands. Looking toward Lovell Canyon, Yoko Range. And here's the Wilson Ridgeline looking back over ground we have covered. And these trees are burnt mountain mahogany, very wiry. You cannot move their branches if they're in the way. Here's a fairly quiet spot. The wind is just roaring up here. Look what we can see though. There's Bridge Mountain. Mount Wilson to the right. Yeah. And then here is the Wilson Ridge. Wilson Ridge is on my mind. There's the southern high point. And then over to the La Madre Mountains. And then the pointy mountain on the horizon is Gas Peak, and Las Vegas Valley, the northern Las Vegas Valley, is just below. Sheep Range over here. Pretty dim. And then here's toward Harris Mountain. So you can see the ridge line we still have to cover. A lot of uphill, but we're making good progress. Or at least we're making progress. I don't know if it's that good. Okay, onward. Oh, by the way, one more thing. There is Harris Mountain Road. And where Harris Mountain Road meets this ridge line, we'll have concluded the third bite in this elephant-sized adventure. And let's go over into the roaring wind just so you can see a good view of Lovell Canyon. There's actually a little trail in this stretch of the Wilson Ridgeline between that last high point where we took the video and Harris Mountain Road. Makes it nice. There's Harris Mountain Road below us. And over this next high point, we'll start descending to the intersection with Harris Mountain Road. But for now, kind of nice to have this little trail. It's a rocky little trail, but it's a little trail. Descending now to Harris Mountain Road. And there is the trailhead for the wilderness approach to Griffith Peak. And that trail goes around the left side of this ridge line. There's Harris Mountain up there. Goes around the left side. It doesn't go up to Harris Mountain, but it goes to the Harris Griffith Saddle, and then it continues on up to Griffith Peak. And there's Sexton Ridge descending on the other side of the canyon. And here's a look at where we are. We'll see a lot more as we ascend from Harris Mountain Road. We're going to ascend the ridge line, and you can see there are a number of high points up there that we're going to need to summit on our way up to Harris Mountain. Beautiful area here. And all those trees that are skeletons are burnt mountain mahogany. We'll be seeing a lot more of that. We're at the summit of Harris Mountain Road, where the Harris Mountain Road and the Wilson Ridge intersect. Here's some information on the different plants and insects that you find up here. Now, if you are taking the Griffith Wilderness Trail to Griffith Peak, you'd go this way, and actually it's the old defunct road that's the extension of Harris Mountain Road. That's a whole story in itself. What we're going to do is we're going to head up, and there are 4 different high points up there before we get to Harris Mountain, and I'll try to get some video at each high point. I gotta watch it because for some reason my battery is not charging the phone like it should, and I don't want to run out of charge before we're done with this adventure. So now we begin the 3rd bite of this huge elephant adventure, or the 4th bite actually, from Harris Mountain Road up to Harris Peak. And then here's looking toward Las Vegas Valley below. Here's the Wilson Ridge we have been on. There's Potosi Mountain in the distance. And Lovell Canyon below. Sexton Ridge across. So gives you an idea where we are. Now let's head up the ridge. Just topped the first high point on the ridge line, up to Harris Mountain summit. There you can see the sheep range. Over here, La Madre Mountains. Over here, the Wilson Ridgeline we've been on. Lovell Canyon, Potosi Mountain at the end. Griffith Peak. A little bit of the Harris Mountain Trail, the old road down there. A few more high points to go, maybe 4. Let's get past that pointy high point up ahead. We'll see what the world looks like up there. And we're in the midst of a burn area, and these are mountain mahogany that have burned. Sheep range in the distance. Continuing up toward Harris Mountain summit. That's not it. it's a few high points beyond. But here's a great view of the Harris Griffith Saddle. Harris Mountain on the right, Griffith Peak on the left. And then down Sexton Ridge, over Lovell Canyon. Las Vegas Valley is showing pretty well. There it is. We'll see more of it, especially when it's lit up at night. Hopefully I'm at a vantage point that we can see that. La Madre Mountains. Here's the Harris Spring Valley, and then way over here, Harris Canyon Ridgeline. And you can see an adventure up there on Las Vegas area trails, and adventures in all the other places I've mentioned. Here's the pointy gas peak above the northern area of Las Vegas Valley. And there's the sheep range. Okay, let's continue upward. Still working on conserving my battery. We'll go around the right side, upper right of that pointy peak. Then I think there are a couple more heights until we hit Harris Mountain summit. And here's the 360 from here. Griffith Peak, Lovell Canyon. We're in the midst of a burn zone, mountain mahogany. You can see in the distance through the mountain mahogany, Potosi Mountain, and looking down the Wilson Ridgeline and parts of the Rainbow Mountains, Bridge Mountain to Mount Wilson. Las Vegas Valley, La Madre Mountains, upper Las Vegas Valley, over to Gas Peak, and the sheep range below is Harris Springs Canyon. And then we're back at the pointy hill. That's one monster to circle. but I think it's going to get easier after that. And by the way, through the Harris Griffith Saddle, there is Charleston Peak on the left, Lee Peak on the right. I'm on the back side of the pointy peak now, looking up at what I think might be Harris Mountain summit. If it's not, it's pretty darn close. And there's the descent to the saddle below. Get a little brightened out by the sun. So yeah, pretty cool up here. It's forest on the back side of the pointy mountain. Maybe we'll call it Sharpie. And if you look on Las Vegas area trails at the Harris Mountain Triangle, we summited on the right, took the ridge line to Harris Mountain on the left, started at Fletcher Canyon Trailhead. That was an awesome trip. Okay, onward, hopefully to the summit now. Just below Harris Mountain summit now. There's the summit straight ahead, that high point. And just looking around, see the ridge I crossed during the Harris Mountain Triangle. In the background, the Sheep Range. Harris Springs Canyon below us. Las Vegas Valley, Upper Las Vegas Valley in the distance. Lower Las Vegas Valley. What a beautiful place this is. Flowers all year round. Come over here. Take a look down Lovell Canyon all the way to Potosi Mountain. Griffith Peak is pretty much in the glare of the sunset, so we won't look in that direction. Potosi Mountain and lower Lovell Canyon. Rainbow Mountains. Bridge Mountain to Mount Wilson. Rainbow Mountain is in the center. There's the Wilson Ridgeline we've traversed. La Madre Mountains, Las Vegas Valley in the background. That's going to look awesome tonight when the lights are all lit up. Here's the northern Vegas Valley. The pointy peak there is Gas Peak, towering above the upper end of Decatur Boulevard. So there you have it. How beautiful. Now let's go up to Harris Mountain Summit. I think that's going to be where I sleep tonight. I need to rest. There's the summit, Karen, for Harris Mountain Summit. So beautiful up here. Bristlecone pines all around. Griffith Peak We'll get really good pictures of Charleston Peak. That's the high point in the center. Mummy Mountain. Sunrise tomorrow's the time to get those. Angel Peak. There's the Sheep Range. Las Vegas Valley. We'll see if we can get some pictures after dark when it's all lit up. But for now, here we are on Harris Mountain. And time to rest. And here's a look down Lovell Canyon all the way to Potosi Mountain. Look at the Rainbow Mountains. Bridge Mountain on the left. Mount Wilson on the right. It's a new day. Griffith Peak doesn't look so daunting after a night's sleep. So down to the saddle and then up to Griffith Peak. There's Griffith Peak in the sunrise. Sexton Ridge comes after Griffith Peak. We'll be taking Sexton Ridge back down to the Griffith Shadow Loop Trail in Lovell Canyon. And there's a shot of Potosi Mountain. Everything in the other direction is pretty much blinded by the sunrise. So this morning we're getting this direction. Let's take a look. Charleston Peak in the sunrise. Mummy Mountain. There's Charleston Peak. And here's Mummy Mountain just catching the first sun. Okay, let's get going. First leg is taking us down this slope to the saddle between Harris Mountain and Griffith Peak. Okay, the goal is to catch the Griffith Wilderness Trail on the saddle below, and that'll take us up to Griffith Peak. And there is a kind of trail or pathway leading down this slope toward the saddle, but I wouldn't count on it. Halfway down the Harris Mountain slope, here's a great view of Kyle Canyon in the morning sun, and then over to Griffith Peak in the direction we're headed. The steepest slope is behind us, and now we're heading for the plateau before the final descent to the saddle. And here's a shot of that steep initial descent from Harris Mountain. On this plateau, it's a matter of winding your way through a new aspen forest that is replacing the burn that occurred back in 2013 from the Carpenter Fire. Our target is that seemingly unpassable cliff on the other side of the saddle, leading up toward Griffith Peak. Fortunately, we'll be aided by a really nice Griffith Wilderness Trail. Here we are, another plateau, this one populated by flowers. Look back up toward Harris Mountain. And here's a mountain mahogany grove burned. And continuing down to the saddle. Once we top Griffith Peak, we'll be heading down Sexton Ridge to the left. Now passing through a mountain mahogany and bristlecone pine grove that was spared the fire. This is what large portions of the slope would have looked like, and all the slopes around here would look like had they not been burned. Lots of intervening slopes and plateaus on the way down from Harris Peak to this saddle, but you reach a point where, yeah, you can see the saddle immediately below. We're looking for the Griffith Wilderness Trail, and not to worry if you have trouble finding it. You will find it before you hit the base of the cliffs on the other side, because that's the only way up the cliffs, and it's going to angle up the right side of the cliffs. And here's a quick view around. In this early morning sun, everything lit up beautifully. There's toward Mummy Mountain and Charleston Peak. And here's the slope we have been descending, and the sun is immediately over it. So I'm not going to blind you with that. Onward. And here we are on the saddle, Griffith Harris saddle, looking toward Griffith Peak there. And we have connected with the Griffith Wilderness Trail. You can see it just to the right of my shadow. Anyway, yeah, that's going to take us up around these cliffs and above. And just to get a look at the world from this saddle, Charleston Peak. Lee Peak. Mummy Mountain. There's Upper Kyle Canyon below. Fletcher Peak. And then, yeah, we'll blind you with the sun just once. Looking up toward Harris Mountain, sun rising immediately over Harris Mountain, which we have just descended. And now we're turning to Lovell Canyon. And there below is Upper Lovell Canyon, all the way to Potosi Mountain at the far end. Beautiful canyon. And then up the Sexton Ridge and toward Griffith Peak, which is way above these cliffs. Here we are winding our way up this surprisingly well constructed trail, taking us easily around and over the cliffs that we were looking at a moment ago. Awesome views of Lovell Canyon below. And by the way, this good trail is the trail that actually began at the junction of Harris Mountain Road and the Wilson Ridge, and you saw the trailhead a little bit back from here. Okay, let's continue on up. This nice little trail has marvelously switchbacked its way from the saddle below up through the cliffs, and now we're reaching the summit above the cliffs. We're going to be watching for a sharp U-turn. Miss that and you're in for a bit of hurt. Now Here is a nice formation of limestone. Here's a good shot of the route from the descent from Harris Mountain to the saddle, then along the edge of the cliffs on the Griffith Wilderness Trail. And now we are above the cliffs, continuing onward. There were some limestone blocks blocking the trail, and I thought that was meant to send us up this grassy ridge line, and no, it wasn't. It was just a irrigation thing. So anyway, I headed up this ridge line and eventually reconnected with the trail. Here we are, and this trail is going to skirt the right side of those cliffs above, maybe the left side. We'll see when we get there. But it's winding around in this direction for now. Mummy Mountain. Kyle Canyon. There you can see the visitor center. And that series of squiggles to the left of the visitor center is the Eagles Nest View Trail. And then back to Lovell Canyon. Yes, definitely skirting the left side of these cliffs on the way up to Griffith Peak, which we can now see. And this trail circles around just the base of the summit and then on up to the summit. And then there's Sexton Ridge, which we will descend. It's downhill all the way at that point. Here's Lovell Canyon, and then back toward Harris Mountain. A couple more 250-foot slopes to reach Griffith Peak. It's over here. I'm considering going for it. There were 3 trail angels who came by, replenished some of my water. Amazing thing. And now I've got enough water. I've broken phone cord, so I've got to be very careful about video and no recharging for the rest of the trip. So anyway, yeah, continuing on the Griffith Wilderness Trail. There we're looking toward Harris Mountain, Lovell Canyon. Pretty hazy down there. And up these 2 slopes to Griffith Peak. Here we go. Final approach to Griffith Peak summit. I think that first grassy slope was the biggest monster. We're almost on the summit now. Wow, those 2 last slopes, switchbacking my way up, they were a lot higher and longer than they looked from below. Sometimes it's the other way around. There you're looking down and into Lovell Canyon, pretty much in the haze. Over here, looking across the Harris Griffith Saddle to Harris Mountain Summit. Sweeping view of Kyle Canyon. There's Griffith Peak Summit, just around the corner. Then it's downhill all the way. Yay. Charleston Peak, Lee Peak, Mummy Mountain, Fletcher Peak, then back to the Harris Griffith Saddle, Griffith Peak behind me, and there's the Griffith Wilderness Trail, an old abandoned road project that was abandoned midway. Big story around that. Essentially, President Hoover came to visit that project. It was supposed to take you from Las Vegas to Pahrump, and about where you see the road peter out down there, Hoover asked, "Where is this going?" And the engineer at the time could not actually say, so Hoover said, "Stop the project." So there's the story. Okay, onward to Griffith Peak Summit. Griffith Peak Summit, now heading down Sexton Ridge all the way to the Lovell Canyon Trailhead, and I'll try to trace the route. We'll see more of it as we go. And this is one of my favorite summits in the Charleston Wilderness. 11,060 feet. Harris Mountain was about 10,300 feet. So beautiful, a lot of haze. Down through the burn area. We begin by descending those two monster slopes that you saw in previous videos at the top of the Sexton Ridge. And by the way, here we are seeing the crossing of the old Griffith Peak Wilderness Trail. Continues on this way, circling around this upper slope and then on up to Griffith Peak. But what we're doing is heading down between the two slopes. The second slope, both of them very steep. We'll descend the second slope and things should level out a bit after that. Having descended the first huge slope from Griffith Peak summit, now we're going down the second huge slope, and you see after that things level off a bit. Actually, it looks like there's a little bit of uphill. The Sexton Ridge borders Trout Canyon to the west. There's Trout Canyon below. And Lovell Canyon to the east. And there's Lovell Canyon. And you can imagine how this ridge line looked when all these majestic bristlecone pines were alive before the big 2013 Carpenter fire burn. Sexton Ridge is pretty much a burned out ridge. The negative part of that is, yeah, you're going through a burned out area. The positive part, you've got non-stop views all the way along Sexton Ridge. It's like being on a mountaintop. Just descended the two initial steep slopes from Griffith Peak, and then along fairly level ridgeline, and then ascending to this point. There's Trout Canyon below to the west. Harris Mountain, you can see the Griffith Harris saddle. Griffith Peak on the left, Harris Mountain on the right, and then the old wilderness trail, that defunct road, and there's where it meets. That's the trailhead down there where it meets Harris Mountain Road. So we're continuing now down the Sexton Ridge. We'll see some more of the descent ahead once we get around these high points that are right ahead. Well, it's pretty much been a matter of just continuing on the ridge line up to this point. Mentioned that there are a couple 1,000-foot stretches on the ridge line I have not yet navigated. Here's one. It seems from a distance that I could see things leveling off on the other side. I'm going to stay high and go over the top of this rocky area and see how it looks on the other side. One awesome benefit of this ridge line that's been burned out is that it's more wide open to the sunshine, and you see it's just carpeted with wildflowers. Very beautiful. And a few trees that survived the burn. That last high point that looks so vertical on the left side, it was very gradual once I ascended that rocky ramp and got to the top. And now there's Trout Canyon. You can see the route ahead. I want to get up to this high point, so we'll just see how that goes. It looks like we've got a clear route ahead down this ridge line, and then this is looking down to Lovell Canyon. Harris Mountain, Griffith Peak, and the saddle. We've just closed the Sexton Ridge gap. I had mentioned there were a few stretches on Wilson and Sexton Ridge that I had not yet done. I've ascended to the high points below us, and it looks like it's easy to get down there, and then it'll be easy to work my way along that ridge and descend to the Griffith Shadow Loop Trail. The only difficulty, of course, is the distance. Let's take a look around. Trout Canyon to the west. Lovell Canyon to the east. Just finished this stretch of high points on the ridgeline. There's Griffith Peak in the background. And you see how we needed to weave around those high points, over and around. This is what lies ahead. And just possibly, we could be looking at the descent ridge into Lovell Canyon. looking toward Lovell Canyon, the La Madre Mountains, Harris Mountain, and that line which is the trail about midway up, Griffith Peak Wilderness Trail. And then over in this direction, Trout Canyon. So there you have it. Perspective on where we are. And by the way, there is Mount Wilson, and to the left, Bridge Mountain. That smooth brown mountain right in the center here. And then over in this direction, the La Madre Mountains. And over here you see the line of that Griffith Wilderness Trail. Where it reaches that saddle there is where the trailhead is. And we were there not long ago. Okay, let's continue. Well, if you ever thought you weren't very important, here's proof otherwise. Okay, we have traversed the ridge line to this point, and over the next bend we will look ahead past the deer up there. We'll look ahead and see if we can see the descent point. Just cover this stretch behind. And now, looking at what lies ahead, and we are getting close to the descent ridge back to Griffith Shadow Loop. There's the ridge we've just covered behind us. To this point, and now, for the first time, we can see where the descent ridge begins. It begins right at this forested area, bit of a bald hill, and it's a left turn down toward Griffith Shadow Loop. Beautiful forested area we've just descended. And then looking ahead, our descent ridge back to the Griffith Shadow Loop Trail is going to be a left turn on the horizon there in the forest. This last part of Sexton Ridge, we've been in a very beautiful forested ridge that escaped the fires. And now you can see the descent ridge ahead, splitting off to the left and down. Just angled across and downward from the Sexton Ridge line. And now we are on the descent ridge line, descending to Griffith Shadow Loop. This descent ridge is pretty straightforward. Just weave around the bushes, stay toward the center, angle a little bit to the left, and you're headed for that point that rounds to the right. You're going to descend into this gully and meet up with the connector trail to the Griffith Shadow Loop.